I'm the Director of Events at the TAPI Young Professional Division Board. It's great to have you all here for our summer webinar series on artificial intelligence. Today marks the first session of a three-part series exploring how AI is transforming our industry, the pulp and paper industry. And we're kicking things off with AI for predictive maintenance in paper mills. Next Thursday, we'll have the Smarter Everyday, how AI is powering the future of operations. And we'll wrap it up on August 14th with Smart Paper Making, AI-driven process optimization. And we hope you will be able to join us for for the entire series. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone of TAPI's commitment to ethical collaboration. And I'm just going to read out the TAPI's antitrust policies and procedures. So TAPI's aim is to promote research and education and to arrange for the collection, dissemination, and interchange of technical concepts and information in fields of interest to its members. TAPI is not intended to and may not play any role in the competitive decision of its members or their employers, or in any way restricts competition among companies. So just a few quick housekeeping notes. Please, like Lisa said, keep your microphones muted and your videos off throughout the session. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat at any time and we'll address them during the Q&A session. Let us also be sure to maintain a respectful, engaging atmosphere for everyone. This session is also recorded and it will be lightly edited. You'll receive the link before the next webinar, next week's webinar, so that you can catch up and share with others. Now I'm excited to introduce today's speaker, Gopakumar, who is the Vice President of Technology and Business Development at the Sun Automation Group. Gokul leads the Sun's global innovation initiatives and product development, including the evolution of Helios, their OEM agnostic LLOT platform tailored to the corrugated industry. With over a decade of experience in engineering leadership across oil and gas, food and beverage, and power infrastructure, he brings a sharp perspective on industrial automation. Before his current role, he served as a Senior Director of Electrical Engineering at Sun, where he spearheaded the design of forward-looking solutions for the box plant of the future. Please welcome Gokul as it starts. Thank you. Hi, Gokul.
Thank you, Ayo. Oh, it's hard to hear that and feel a little too self-important. Well, nice to meet you all. A pleasure to be here today and be a part of this educational series that TAPI's hosted. I'm grateful to TAPI to give this opportunity for us all to have a discourse and learn and share our knowledge and learn from each other. Artificial intelligence is a hot button topic, but also very relevant given how much of an impact it's having in every factor of our life at the moment. And to be as educated as possible is crucial for all of us in our careers, personal lives, etc. So yeah, excited to be here and share some of my information, some of my learning and knowledge with you guys today. I'm going to share a slide deck that I've put together as a framework for us to talk through today. It isn't very tech heavy because the intention I have, hold on. Can you guys see this? I want to make sure you can, is everyone able to see the presentation?
Yeah, I can
okay.
see.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're here to talk about AI and predictive maintenance. As an outline for what we're looking to cover today, I'm going to touch briefly on some of the most hot button topics in artificial intelligence and kind of zoom out a little bit from paper and pulp and see the wider space. Often that's not as important in technology, but with artificial intelligence, it is, given all of this is only 2.5, 3 years old for most people, right? So it's a remarkably accelerated form of technology in terms of adoption and innovation. So it's important to kind of keep abreast with where the rest of the organizations or workspaces are and where the changes of where some of their ideas are taking them. And then pivot and focus a little bit on our personal journey with AI product development and creating an AI-based product for corrugated box plants, which is a very niche specific manufacturing space within my personal opinion and my experience, the challenges and some of the successes we went through in that journey translate across different industries, um, different industrial makeups. So the goal there is to walk you through our journey so you take away a good example of how you can take a problem through creating a solution using AI tools and implementing it, and then share our learning so that you can use that in educating your decisions going forward. Um, because all of us are in different walks of life and in different parts of our organizations, and all of us will be impacted in different ways. I think the general nature of that will help you implement and practically make and bring practical side to some of the wide range of options we have available today in terms of AI tools and services. I like to start with this cartoon graphic because I'm sure some of you feel this way too. I certainly do, that there is an overwhelming presence of AI in our lives. It's everywhere, and it's at the forefront of every piece of technology we touch nowadays. It's impossible to go uh, to any form of to purchase any form of technology down to water bottles, without it being marketed as AI, or refrigerators. So that's a big change, and it happened very quickly. And it's important for that reason to keep in mind that some of the information that we're getting is commercially focused. So a lot of the content, if you want to call it that, that's available readily on the internet is generated by private institutions that are selling AI-based products. So there is some bias, even if it isn't intentional, that we all have to be cognizant about. So a few slides at the end of today's presentation, I've left to talk about some general myths about AI and general perceptive questions that we all kind of have, at least based on today's information. And before I get started, that's the last thing I want to keep in everybody's mind. Nothing I'm going to talk about today is prescriptive for two reasons. One, AI is a pretty broad field, so there isn't a clear yes and no for everything. It's not been defined yet. It's pretty raw in that nature. And then the other piece of it is it's changing so quickly. So everything I'm telling you about could be obsolete by the end of this conversation. It's in that it's still relevant, some of the topics, but it can't be prescriptive. It's truly because of the pace with which things are changing. To give you some context, I'll give a quick introduction to myself. My background, I'm a hardware guy. I started in electrical engineering. This is Sun Automation for people who are unaware of us. We're a small machine building OEM, and essentially an engineering-based electromechanical and now software product company based in Maryland, and exclusively supplying to corrugated box plants for the last 40 years. And then one unique feature I always like to tell people about, and it does affect the way we operate, and then I think it also affects the way we innovate. We are essentially people-centric because we are people-owned. That picture there is our entire shareholders, because we're 100% employee-owned. And that has been a driving factor for the way we've approached creating a solution with AI. And it's, in my opinion, been the most effective. It's been a reason for it being effective, because technology and tools are only as effective as the people who are impacted by it and are able to use it day to day. So having that focus and keeping that very close to your heart when you're thinking about using these things has been challenging, but also very rewarding. So, like I said, let's start looking at it from a broad perspective. As a, maybe with a show of hands, how many of you guys in your organizations today are using officially or unofficially, let's not officially are using some form of AI? Let's see, can I see how many hands there are? There are a few, there's 3, 4, 6, about half of you guys raise your hands. And that's not uncommon, right? This is a forecast out of an MIT report surveying several thousands of manufacturing companies across different divisions, and different other industries, like where finance, for instance, is a big industry for AI. But you can see all the way at the bottom, supply chain and manufacturing, which they've grouped together, this block of 38%, that means almost 38% of the people they talk to have some critical part or function of their process is now AI based or AI driven. That could be very small, but it is significant to note that manufacturing is a pretty large area across the board for AI becoming a very important cornerstone for operations. It may not always be in operations itself. It may be in front office functions, but it is having tremendous impact. So it is relevant for us to be talking about it in paper and pulp in 2025, and even more relevant in the years coming in the future. And there's no other surprises here where you can see HR, finance, and sales and marketing have increased focus on them. And we'll dive into some of that in the next couple of slides. But some of the big advantages that AI products offer today have significant impact in data analytics and allowing people to access information more effectively. So those two factors, if you think about it broadly, you can imagine why people in finance would care of having some assistance in analyzing large data sets, and people in marketing and sales would want the same because they need to figure out what people would do in the future in many cases. It'd be nice to have that, right? To know what people will want so that you can sell them what they need. But that's becoming a much larger focus. So let me go to the next screen. Although the primary focus of today is in predictive maintenance, and we won't be talking about large language models a lot, I do want to touch on it because a lot of the exciting domination of news and in fact in investment is in what we kind of call large language models as a whole group. And does anybody on the group already know what large language models are, even at a high level? I see no signs of a raise hands. Good. So, large language models are a form of AI that became extremely visible to the public when ChatGPT became live. So that is an example of a large language model in progress, right, or available to us today. But there are several ones like Cloud and DALL-E and so on and so forth. What it does, it's really good at taking significantly large data sets and then using a mode of AI called deep learning, understand the relationship between words and patterns between words, and most importantly, respond with that language to you and take questions from you in that language. The term for that is natural language processing. That's very key. So and it's one of the reasons why it's become so popular and so widely approached, because you don't have a barrier of learning how to write software code to get answers from it. You're not writing a function or learning Python to get an answer. You're asking it a very broad question, like you would ask your friend, what type of chili peppers would be most beneficial in making kimchi? And then it would answer like a person in many ways, at least the way it's structured, because it knows that, rather effectively in most cases. Key things to keep in mind is this type of model, which is very widely used today, needs huge amounts of data to process to get relatively good at it, and it still makes a lot of mistakes, right? We all heard of these chat-based products making inaccurate claims and sometimes sharing information that it shouldn't, and things like that. And that's because it isn't sentient like people kind of think about it. It's not making intelligent correlations. It's just understanding that most of the time these things align together. So based on these things in the words that you put to me, I think these are the things that will closely align with what you've asked me. Now, the amount of data, a good example of how much data it needs is ChatGPT ran out of data in the internet. That is a significant amount of information, and it didn't have enough information to improve beyond because there wasn't anything left that, even with it uh, not honoring some rules around what it can and cannot read on the internet, which in the future I'm sure there'll be laws regarding that. But even without it having any restrictions, given that it's the first one that went out there, um, it was able to go in and use all this information up already. So now they're using AI and large language models to generate more information to do it. Why is this important? Because most of us in our day-to-day jobs and our day-to-day lives are going to see applications built on large language models. And I wanted to make sure you guys had some peripheral understanding of how they work and why they have significant limitations. So something that's trained on the internet has a lot of good information, and you guys have been on the internet, has a lot of bad information. So based on how specifically you ask it and how specifically you massage information out of it, you may or may not get really valuable data out of it, right? We're already seeing courses on prompt engineering and things like that because that's essentially allowing you to write things more specifically. And the adoption is very related to that. I'm going to dive into another slide here. Computer scientists and I say content generators, but essentially people who do a lot of marketing and advertising and lead by a significant amount the amount of occupational representation there is in cloud, which is similar to ChatGPT and other large language model, because in these areas the user is in most cases someone who understands the difference between what it's giving it being right or wrong, and can appreciate the added value that these models can give you back. So, for instance, if cloud or another LLM gives you an answer where there's a technical gap or it's making a mistake, an assumption that's incorrect, if you're already technically knowledgeable, you would know not to do that and then ask it to frame it a different way and get around it. And they're the ones who day in, day out use it the most at the moment. So large language models, lots of data, very expensive in terms of energy and things like that. And then you can get results, but it's typically in these areas, if you want to create advertising content or messaging content or do some data analytics with very specific data information that you are very clear about asking it questions, it does it really well. I am limiting its scope here quite deliberately because there are ways to use it much more effectively than I described it. But for somebody who just opened up chatgpt.com and started using it, that's where you're going to be. So recognizing that is important wherever you are in your journey and starting to adopt AI for your personal or professional reasons. The big win, though, that ChatGPT or an LLM can provide, especially in larger organizations, is this idea of data democratization. It's a difficult term. I'm sure they'll come up with a much more catchy way to say it, but it's a proven high value result. It's the reason why HR, for instance, and to some degree, sales and marketing use LLMs in large organizations effectively now, because how many of you guys work in an organization where there's data structured all over the place, where you need to find something and you don't know where to look, so you have to call somebody to figure out where do I look for it? And that's not uncommon. It's the larger the organization, the more divisions, the more spread out an enterprise it is, the larger the number of silos and data silos, especially for information that it creates. An LLM, and this is Microsoft's pitch with Copilot. It's a good idea. I don't think it's well implemented with Copilot yet. But the idea of having an enterprise where all your information, this I talked about, is structured well, and so it requires some reorganization to be very effective. And then things like this, where we're recording meetings or recording webinars and other informational sessions, and that does transcriptions automatically. becomes another source of information. And as long as it's stored centralized, you can use a large language model to learn off of that specific subset of information and then ask it questions. So if when you need something, instead of going and finding out, well, who do I ask? Do I ask Paul? Well, this is not really marketing. Maybe I need to ask, Sheila, because this is like customer success, whatever. You're making all these commands. You can go into this model and ask it a simple question like, I need to find out when we had this issue with customers last year, what do we do? And it would pull up, it'll give you an answer in summary, and then it will give you all your sources. So you can go look at potential emails or any other stored documentation around this. And without you have not even been part of the company at that point and are able to quickly answer that question. So the data democratization, that's what it means. Essentially, it allows and it's really powerful for new employees, but for all employees, especially in large organizations, to benefit from the collective data that the information that the organization has without it having all these barriers where the people have to be involved. And it's even more important now when we have discrete people working in different parts of the country, in different time zones and different environments, working remote, hybrid, in office. It's even more important in that nature to have something like this. This is something we're looking at the company internally because it benefits us to have these things which are often just tribal knowledge and people know where to go look. And it's hard to document every such instance in such a way that when you bring on somebody new, they're able to replicate it. Does that make sense? Hopefully that kind of covers the idea. And obviously in Q&A, if you have any questions about this, happy to dive in any deeper. I'm going to pivot here to the not so cool and exciting part of AI, which has been around for longer and has provided reliable and successful results in manufacturing for close to almost a decade now. The tool I'm talking about is machine learning. It's a subset of AI or a part of artificial intelligence, but it's very different from large language models. That's the reason why I started there, because many of you may have come in expecting that, and then because that's a lot of people's knowledge of artificial intelligence only extends to things like ChatGPT. And why is it that I'm talking about machine learning? Well, I'll start with a brief introduction of what it is. And thinking of a good way to explain this without it being functions and complicated equations, the best way I can think about is if when you had a robot traditionally and you wanted to teach it to pick something up, let's say this little eraser, as an engineer, you went out and figured out all the inertias and how much speed and how much force to use so you didn't crush this and you didn't throw this away or you didn't fling it across the room when you lifted it too fast. So you had to think about all these things, factor it in, and build a mechanical model. And so essentially you tell it all the answers, and so that repeatably it can do this function without fail, right? So that's how traditional programming works by and large. My 3-year-old learns how to pick this up not the same way. He has no problems picking up a glass and then flinging it across the room, watch it crash and burn, and then laugh and have a great day. But over time, he learns that, oh, that is too much force, or that's too much, that this is slippery. I need to hold it with more grip. These are things that no one's telling him explicitly to look for, but he learns over time naturally. And so that's the way machine learning works. What it has is code in place to learn based on what it sees. So over time, that's a big part of machine learning, where it's not a finished article immediately. Over time, it improves and adjusts to different factors. And you can think of how profoundly powerful that is, because when you buy something like a robot and it does a specific function, it does that really well repeatedly. But let's say, to account for all the kind of situations, someone like that has to control the environment and maybe make it do a big arc for it to do a pick and place. In your case, you're maybe picking only one small thing and putting it there, and it doesn't need all this arc. there's no way the robot would learn this, right? It would require for you somebody at the plant to invest in some technical knowledge to come and be process experts so they understand all this and then make optimization and all this calculations and things like that, which is expensive. And most manufacturing processes don't have that kind of technical bench strength to make that a realizable solution. Whereas now you can, if it's machine learning based models, which a lot of robotics have moved towards now, and it's pretty prevalent there, you end up having the opportunity for it to adjust itself over time based on the results. Because it's saying, well, I can achieve a 3-second cycle time versus a 5-second cycle time if I did the same thing slightly differently. And that's the power of machine learning, and that's the power of having it being live, right? So those are two things to keep in mind. One is when I say live, it's connected to information coming in today, right now. And two, it is able to be specific without needing additional programming. That adaptive approach. So machine learning, in summary, it's essentially a program that gives machines not explicit answers, but the framework to learn how to do it effectively and keep learning over time. And it has an adaptive and iterative approach. It iterates over time and then and it optimizes. And because it's iterative and constantly learning, it will adapt and get better and better and better. The big challenge with it, as should be clear to a lot of people now, is a lot of machine learning products are not as good on day one as they are on day 20. That is quite an interesting problem when you're looking for looking for a solution. It's like hiring a teenager and then waiting them to become an adult to do the job effectively. You can imagine that being potentially very frustrating. um, and there's ways around it, and oftentimes it's sometimes it's like having a trained teenager. Let's say you end up having a space where it gets close to good before you end up using it. But that's a way to sort of look at it as different from traditional programming. And why is machine learning relevant? And in fact, this kind of goes towards AI as a whole. What changed in the last 10 years? Several things changed. There were breakthroughs in mathematics and computational algorithms. But the big thing that made it realizable at the scale it is realized today is some of the other things that changed over time gradually. Computing capacity being where it's at today. If you had to build a computer to run machine learning algorithms in your plant, that would be potentially restrictively expensive because you would have to have server space and rooms, hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in hardware. Whereas now, because of the availability of cloud-based computing and the availability of compute resources at a click, I can ask for the resources enough of 10 or 15, 20 computers with a click. It makes it accessible where you are without it being upfront on those hardware costs. Obviously, you pay over time, but it reduce your barrier of entry. The second thing is we've become more and more information driven as a society, as organizations. Everything is over emails or system processing, different things. So ERP systems or MES systems or CRMs, these are all normal. You know, Salesforces use CRMs, operations use ERPs, shipping and SIPs and logistic systems that allow for forecasting and planning. That means a lot of the things that you would need is now digital. Like a lot of the information we're talking about is already digital, and therefore you have this data set available for something like machine learning to ingest. And then one of the things with iterations and adaptive nature of machine learning is once they get implemented over and over in different cases, we get better at knowing what to do, what not to do, what type of features to look at, these type of things. So our ability to implement has gone significantly better because we can do it more, right? And we just learn. In the last 10 years or so, we've learned a lot in how effective it can be in certain areas. I'm going to dive into the two big categories, supervised and unsupervised. I'm not going to go into the reinforcement learning today. It's important to understand this because machine learning is very effective, but these two types of supervised and unsupervised learning have different ways of being effective. And when you're looking at a problem to solve at the end of the day, you need to understand what data do you have and how do you solve it. And then choosing the tool depends on both what data do you have and how you solve it. And so this should give you a framework to understanding, okay, I should be looking at this type of information and I should be looking at this type of tool. Diving into supervised learning, key point here is this is the most effective version of machine learning. It does what it needs is it needs a data set where it has some outcomes and some of the things that affect the outcome. So a good example that's used in a lot of machine learning courses is real estate pricing and predicting real estate pricing in a specific area. In this situation, the data set that a supervised learning model that's been asked to predict what a house will sell for or house should be priced at is it would have a list of historical sales in that geography with all the key elements that affect price. So it would have number of bedrooms, square footage, if it's attached or not, so on and so forth, laid out. And then it would have the end result. It sold for X amount of dollars. And then what the supervised learning does, it looks at the information and iterates internally until it figures out, okay, based on history, in this area, people really care about having an extra bathroom, or people really care about total square footage more than this. And so it weights how important these factors are very, very, very well. And then and based on that learning, when it's given new information, so here's a house that it hasn't seen before. It's got so many bedrooms and so many bathrooms, and then it will be able to tell you, okay, based on that, this will be the price. Now, why is that important? If you have that type of data set where you know historical outcomes and you have some understanding of what contributes to these things, those are the key parts. And obviously you need some history, right? So if you know those two things and you don't have the data set, you can start collecting it. But if you have both of those and they're relatively well aligned, it's pretty effective to use supervised learning, pretty cost effective and easy to implement as well if you have those checkboxes. And the results are very good. It predicts pricing very, very well. When you get a number very close, and that's how they get to that number. Here are some other relevant use applications. So if you have applications similar to like image or object quality control type of applications, supervised learning is what's very, very effective. In fact, in packaging right now, there are several hundreds, if not thousands, of image and video recognition technology that's ML based and supervised learning based that is really effective at capturing obscure type of issues that are very specific to one industry and not in another industry. And like I said, the adaptive nature of these means that over time, if there are slight changes in the picture or slight changes in the type of pictures it starts seeing, it will be able to adapt to it without you or somebody at the plant having to go and recalibrate and make big changes in the program. Personally speaking, while some of the first automation projects I did as an electrical engineer were vision systems, and they worked really well. But then when there were slight imperfections, like in our case, it was humidity and dew that ended up on packaging, it had to be recalibrated and reprogrammed, and it causes at a high speed, production line, it sometimes causes days of downtime because there's a humidity in the air, and now this whole quality control system doesn't work. You avoid that, right? Without it being significantly expensive and finding engineers to come in and fix your problems. Predictive analytics, predicting prices, like I mentioned, predicting if you have the right data set, you can use this type of algorithm to predict usage or logistical decision making very effectively. And this is all kind of internal to your organization, very specific, right? So that's key part here. Machine learning can become very specific in its value creation, which means you can solve a very specific problem relatively quickly and with high level of precision. Customer sentiment analysis, sales and marketing always try to get that feedback with a lot of touch points with customers. What this does is it'll give you a large, if you with the right kind of information data set, it can potentially give you what people respond to most. These guys like emails and having a phone call once in a while. These guys like being texted. These guys like, discounts and so on and so forth. These kind of sort of not obvious things that good sales folks and good marketing folks often know based on experience and knowledge and dealing with people. When you have large data sets that you can't cover everything and everybody everywhere, some of these algorithms can make it very effective for a new salesperson taking on a territory to be more effective. Spam detection, I like putting that there. All of us have felt the value add from this. I remember years ago when junk and spam was a big thing in our inboxes. About all the large scale mail providers just have a supervised learning based spam detection now. So it can get it wrong sometimes and send some people who aren't spam in there, but almost always what it sends there is spam. And it's really, really effective, like 99.9% times effective. That's the value of machine learning. You can get to that kind of value add. And it's important in manufacturing to keep that in mind, because all of us work in operations in many cases where we are in a high volume or high speed sort of setup, meaning downtime hurts, and we need things to happen every day, repeatably, reliably, and effectively. And in many cases, we don't have the luxury of redundancy. So any critical failure affects us pretty immediately. So in those situations, having algorithms that give you highly precise information is crucial, because being 80% is not reliable enough for many applications. So that's something to keep in mind. And that's some of those reasons why I'm going into machine learning specifically. When you get down to it, and if you have a very specific problem to solve, you want to go down to, and it needs to be solved accurately every day. You want to be contemplating if machine learning is the right approach. Unsupervised learning is very important because, supervised learning is the perfect scenario. Unsupervised learning is most likely where people can start, because we don't all have the luxury of having information well organized, well structured, well set up, and we need and it's often jumbled and unlabeled, meaning it isn't clear what this means, what that means, the way it's stored or structured. But you still want to see if there are patterns or information within there that's relevant, because you have to make decisions based on that. So that's where unsupervised learning comes in, and it's come a long way, right? It's a much more complicated problem to solve because of the unknown, let's say. And it isn't as precise as supervised learning because of the unknown. But these things that I listed out here, some of you who are working in the depths may know of them. But point of it is, you can take a data set that is pretty broad and unknown and get some pattern information out of it. And based on that patterns indicate that a decision needs to be made, which can be very, very, very valuable. And when we get into our use case and our journey in AI, in a couple of slides, you'll see that we ended up using unsupervised learning because that was the only option available, and how we navigated that to make it effective and value added as a product for our customers. So it's a very important thing to keep in mind that it isn't a prerequisite to have clean, pristine data to get pattern recognition type of information, but there are trade-offs. The better your information, the better you know what you're looking for, essentially. You end up having a high likelihood in creating something that out of the box is closer to what you want. Whereas with unsupervised learning, it might take more time because it needs to kind of figure things out without it being told explicitly all the information, what it is it's looking at. Couple of applications for you guys to look at in sort of like process what I'm talking about. I think the big one big one I would focus on is recommendation engines. So all of us, most of us probably have used Netflix or a competitor of Netflix's for video and movies and TV shows and things like that. And you'll see you have feeds of recommended, what else would you be watching? And now a lot of that is based on unsupervised learning because it doesn't have a perfect record starting out. If you just create an account, it doesn't have any history to say, oh, this person particularly wants to watch this type of video or this type of movie or TV show would like it. But unsupervised learning is used to kind of based on what you've clicked on and watched and how much time you've spent, kind of detect a pattern to say, okay, and you will notice that it changes over time. Sometimes it's full of Christmas movies, and sometimes it's full of in July, and sometimes it's full of romantic comedies, and sometimes it's full of action movies based on what you're kind of feeling in the moment, and it adapts well because what it's really doing is learning your pattern of behavior, and I'm kind of saying, okay, based on this, I think these are the type of videos and movies that the individual will prefer. And then that's also a key point of understanding unsupervised learning. The result of it is a pattern. So what Netflix does really well, or Prime, or any other competitive product does really well, is take this pattern, interpret it, and then the user is not seeing a pattern. So you're not being told, you seem to be liking Christmas movies right now. You're given just some options. So it acts on the result for you. And that's kind of critical with unsupervised learning because you're not sure about exact specificity of the result. You're just seeing a pattern and you have to make a decision based on it. And it's easier for the user if you can get them closer to the decision point, as close as possible. In summary, supervised learning, it needs to know exactly what happened in the past. And if it does a phenomenal job of giving you results based on that. Unsupervised learning has a lot of data that's all over the place, and then it kind of figures out, okay, based on what I see, there are some of these patterns evolving, and then it is incumbent on the person developing the model to figure out, okay, what do you do? What do I tell people based on this pattern? Because otherwise, they'll end up being not usable, right? You need to get them. You need to add some layer of interpretation on top of unsupervised learning to make it effective to whoever is meant to make decisions out of this information. Now, the title of this topic was predictive maintenance, and I haven't talked about it yet. And the main reason is I had to come down from AI to predictive maintenance, and so AI is a big field, and it's such a big field that this series and webinars, no matter how much content we all try and cover, we're not going to cover everything that's in the space quite effectively, right? So I wanted to give you guys a broad view of that, and then bring you back down to a very specific use and a problem, which is ultimately reliability of machines. So in industrial manufacturing, the three big areas where AI has been used, I kind of touched on quality improvement and vision. That's a big part of its effectiveness, across the board in manufacturing and operations. Efficiency is a big one, and finding ways to use production data and scheduling and planning information to make better decisions on how to get the most out of your assets. That's another big area where people are seeing very actionable results, because the limited number of people that are doing those jobs in these manufacturing areas are able to make better decisions if they don't have to spend as much time diving into all the information and can get access to it quickly. But the area we focused on was the reliability portion, because as a one of our largest product groups is electromechanical machinery that prints, cuts corrugated board, and reliability for that asset is a huge factor for our customers, because high-speed production is a necessity in that market, and downtime can be brutal in that market for our customers. So increased reliability has always been a factor. And starting in 2018, we started looking at ways to help our customers beyond just beefing up our machines and making it as fatigue resistant and wear proof as possible so that even under duress and stress, machines will keep running. It became pretty clear from customer feedback that to get the most out of these assets, though, consistently, they will need to manage and maintain these machines over time more effectively. And that's a complicated problem to solve because there's a lot of different machines out there that do a lot of different types of production, and the environment changes everywhere from even in the same state. So with all that complexity, it took us a few years to figure out what can we do. And we understood it had to be data driven, and so it needed to have data collection. And then we had to then solve the problem of, well, what do you do with this information in a way that at a manufacturing facility, which is in most cases starved for resources, where there aren't extra people to go in and just look at dashboards day to day and make effective decisions. How do we make it easier for that particular user base to digest this information? And that's where we stumbled upon machine learning. That was in 2019, which feels like a complete age ago because that was before the pandemic happened. A lot has changed in between 2019 and 2025. But that's where we started. That's how our journey began with AI. We found a specific problem we needed to solve, which was unplanned downtime and increasing the reliability, machine reliability of machines at customer sites. And then we were looking at what was available then. And to be honest, if we were to approach that problem today, there'll be small modifications in what we would choose, but machine learning would still be the perfect starting point because of some of the challenges, right? So what we effectively had to do was collect raw machine data, unlabeled. And we had to collect raw data from ERP, which was labeled but often inaccurate, and then train models to automatically ingest this information and detect patterns and predict changes, predict anomalies based on these patterns. That was a big challenge because of the starting point, and more importantly, when you're trying to predict patterns and there's not a consistency, so if people are not making the same thing over and over again with the same machine, it's hard to build that learning over time. So we had to find ways to simulate some of these things to improve our time to improve our speed in terms of training. And then we had to figure out how much information, what information, and the gaps. We understood quickly that there may be gaps in data. So our initial approach, and we're in step 2 right now, where we're adding sensors to box plants, but we wanted to identify your data gaps before we went out and added sensors. So it made sense that if you have information available today, you want to use that as much as possible, and then be very specific and precise in where you added extra data points there with sensors or software, etc. And then ultimately go from that unsupervised model to a supervised model, which is where we're at right now. This is an important kind of learning for 2 reasons. One, most information out there when you start looking at AI, you kind of see the finished article and it's very exciting. But if it needs to be specific to your organization or your use case, then you have to start thinking about, well, how does it know this information? And then you start digging into that and then say, oh, you need information. Well, we have this information, but is it usable? Is it accessible? These are the challenges that immediately come up. And then is it a clearly defined problem where you have all the information? Great. Now you just have to solve the collection piece and the training piece. Still big problems, but at least that's a smaller problem than starting with no data collection, where box plants had never collected data for the most part ever, at least in the US. So we had to start from scratch, and it is hard, but it is rewarding because we learned a lot along the way. We learned about some of the challenges in the data quality that we could improve on because people were recording downtime. Operators who were starved for time and attention were penciling in or selecting from drop-down lists the reason for downtime, which were all over the place and pretty inconsistent. Not just because of the nature of that task. And then that's a big gap that we could fix with machine learning algorithms. We also learned that some of this other information, like for production needs, are because of box plants haven't collected data. There's a lot of uses for the live data we're starting to collect that aren't just predictive maintenance. That's the other beauty of having going down this path. You end up having information, especially live information, accessible. It makes you able to notice things that are cost prohibitive. So most box plant operations we noticed weren't recording stops under a certain amount of time. Well, that meant that you were potentially not seeing significant amount of downtime over a year because it just isn't captured and the reasons aren't captured. It's cost prohibitive because if we had an operator log all of it manually, that would be a full-time job for an operator. So we can fix that with machine learning, and that's another value. That's another advantage of having to build that infrastructure from scratch. A couple of other use cases that we found around calibration of machines and improving knowledge of like specific orders. We have several order changes in a shift, maybe 12, maybe 30, depending on the operation, sometime even more than that. There isn't enough time for supervisors or production staffs to very specifically remember how effectively to make adjustments, just make certain orders run consistently at its top at the machine's top capacity. Again, these gaps where their human resources don't have the ability to spend time looking at it. If you had the data infrastructure and you know that's something that's valuable, you can flip that around and make it realizable, right? So key takeaway is while it's daunting to build your own data infrastructure, there are significant advantages far beyond even the value you start with that comes out of having it. Because once you have it, it can go in several different places. This is a case study we did early on in 2021 for one of our first predictive models that we implemented live. And I put this up here for two reasons. One, it is raw data that we used, and we had to spend a year and a half training models to figure out what makes it effective. What would be an effective training data set and a predictive window that's real valuable for customers. So how early do you need to predict things to make it valuable? Once we did that, we were able to take information that we hadn't seen before and train our model. So train our model, and then based on its learning, it was able to predict that a certain amount of downtime very accurately is going to happen well in advance. The numbers go up when you try to put dollar numbers to it. And the reason I think it's important for you to see is there is tremendous value at the end if you do go down this path. It is a difficult path, but there is tremendous value. And the second piece of it is because it is brand new for most organizations and brand new for most manufacturing facilities, it is important for internal teams to understand how they can articulate this and have the focus of that value at the end, have that dollar amount in mind when building these infrastructures or implementing these kind of models, because it's kind of like being an internal entrepreneur. You need to see how you need to convince the organization or the people you're talking to with numbers that they can understand that this will provide that kind of results and to drive that adoption. So it's important to contextualize these things, especially if you're in an organization where it's early on and you're just starting to adopt these things to push the change. It's important to frame information in that regard. Key learnings, I think, extending out of our Helios journey, us a small, we're not a big tech company, and we are primarily, until we started doing Helios, primarily an electrical and mechanical engineering company. My background is in electrical engineering. I had done optimization and learning algorithms, not necessarily data science in my master's, but I hadn't used it in industrial applications in my career since then. So when we joined Sun and started getting into the software aspect, I was excited to be able to finally use some of the things I learned in college on my job. Because how many of us go to college and never use any of that, right? But the key learnings I think that everyone should take away from our journey is that it is very important to focus on the right type of problem to solve, however big or small. Having that definition is imperative because it is not very effective in my experience and in other industries where we have seen that broad spectrum approach to try and solve everything with one solution. Um, for many reasons. It's not just the technology's fault in that case. It's important to have that specific value or problem to start with, and then going out and finding the right way to solve it is where I was or wanted to kind of emphasize, saying that there are these large language models that solve for if you have data sets and have the resources to implement that internally, can solve problems of that nature where it can give you information readily. But if the problem you're trying to solve is around live data collection and getting insights live, and it needs to be very reliable and precise. You might need to look at other types of learning algorithms that fall under AI, but aren't necessarily large language models. They're not completely separate. You could have, and you will have eventually, machine learning algorithms create information that you only see through a large language model. So you're only going to ask a question like, well, how well did my production do here on this day based on these type of things? And then it'll pull it all up and be able to give you the insights and the patterns that I just talked about. So they're not completely separate, but from a starting point, you want to look at the problem, pick the right solution model, and then acknowledge that training and calibrating can be slow and expensive, depending on how well you know the situation. Subject matter expertise is crucial. You can find the best data scientists to work on your problem, and you would still need to close the gap in making sure they understand the specificities of the problems they're trying to solve within your expertise, right? So if it's in a paper mill and you've got a problem around the formulation and consistency of fibers in a particular medium that you're running, a data scientist is not going to know that type of detail in your area of expertise and will need to be guided with that expertise to be effective and most importantly for that training and calibrating to be not expensive, right? So that's been our learning, and it's not prescriptive, but at least that's been our experience where having quality data science teams meet subject matter expertise significantly reduced our training and calibration time for our machine learning models and continues to be effective because of that. Implementation is never ending. I think that's another piece. A lot of people think of software as an install and it works. Machine learning is iterative and adaptive, meaning it's going to continue to change and evolve and be more valuable, but it means it'll need continued attention over time. So that is this mind shift. You have to think of this as something that's going to be supported organizationally, leadership, and everywhere else for a period of time. And then you'll get more and more value as time goes. So that's another key takeaway from here. It's not like Excel. Excel just gets installed and it does what you expect it to do from day one, and it only does that, right? For the most part. But machine learning is different. It's like getting something that becomes Excel at the end of point, at the end of time. And integration and behavior and people skill set, these are all the reasons why implementation is crucial. People are adapting and learning. All of us here are at a stage in our careers where we're having to relearn some things with this new lens of what AI could do. And that could be a continuous process. It's not a one and done type of thing. And therefore, that part of the implementation will continue to be iterative and repeated. And it's been a big challenge for us rolling out our products to box plants to get that change to happen because of that, because of the people, behavior, and skill set and their existing processes. Other kind of takeaways, these are all important. I think the collaboration focus is key. If you have software you're going to be buying or using or do use at the moment, keep in mind that you're you should have the opportunity to combine information that these software providers are using in some capacity in the future for your own benefit. A lot of software wasn't written or produced to do that. So it is a task, and it can be expensive for software providers to write links and integrations, but it is necessary in for the world that we're going to be inhabiting in the future for these software systems to be able to talk pretty coherently with each other. A lot of big industrial operations are starting to switch from having information in different systems to having one big data lake or one big set of information that everybody talks to, for that reason, so that you have the ability in the future to scale that. If you're not going to implement AI and large language models or machine learning today, but you want to do it in 2030, having that infrastructure means in 2030 you can start and be done and have something effective in 2031. Whereas if you're going to start in 2030 to build it, it may be also cost prohibitive. You may have to change ERP supplier in some cases because it just isn't working. So that's something to keep in mind. That's a big. You probably won't have to change ERP suppliers. ERP suppliers are already changing their approach to allow for significant data integrations. But point I'm trying to make is the further away you start putting these things, like the way you look at and organize your information, the further away your ability to take value also becomes, and it's exponential to some degree. Data integrity, that's what we found. We ended up in a situation where the problem wasn't the amount of information, amount of data we had. That is always going to be an issue with machine learning and how much data can you provide it. And more data, broadly speaking, is better. But data integrity is almost just as crucial, especially if you're going to start with unlabeled, unknown kind of data sets and unsupervised learning. And when I say data integrity, it's the things that are like the operators keying in downtimes. So when and using and keying them in correctly, that makes no difference in that moment to the operator. But if a system that doesn't know anything else is making associations based on what's been clicked, now it's completely off base based on just one row being removed, right? So it is important that if you're going to start envisioning a future where there are these models providing value on top of everything you're doing today, everybody working today needs to start thinking about how they're using the processes they're using right now and using it appropriately. So if it's an ERP system, they're checking the right boxes and not making workarounds, because all those little workarounds that kind of get the job done today means that the information in the system is inaccurate, which means anything that's learned off of it or at a higher level is ineffective and unusable. So that's another thing that's not necessarily eye-opening, but it's very crucial for something like this to be effective in the future. And it was a big gap that we're still working on closing. Data security. This is my kind of take on it. I think most responsible service providers and solution providers do a good job of advocating for this. But at the same time, it is crucial that any organization has a good set of internal teams and measures in place to own that and also guide these decisions, because your information is your information and it should be very clear to you without being worried about it, what it's going to get used into, of who or what has access to it outside. And it is particularly important with applications like AI because it can be used in a way that's not obvious outside of your organization if you don't deliberately create those walls and structures in place. It's an important part of this, and it's an important thing to keep in mind. And it's obviously easier if everything is in-house. But if you are, and most of us will be, using external services to build up this infrastructure, that's a key part to keep in mind. And we spend a lot of time figuring out how to select data, how to store data, how to encrypt it when it's in storage or in transport, and do access control so that we meet the requirements and in our opinion the data security standards that a lot of more commercially viable SaaS products already do have. So that there's no real standard yet that everybody needs to follow. There's no, I'm sure there will be UL standard for AI products for industrial organizations. So you do have some work to do on your end to make sure you have something that guides that process. And I think people are key. I think the hidden part of this is there's a lot of talk of AI and how workforces changes, but the thing that we're starting to understand is both in when we were selling and implementing solutions at customer side and internally is upskilling or giving your the employees within the opportunity to learn how to engage with these products day to day and utilize them more effectively in their work life is crucial. And ultimately, when you're bringing in talent and people, that's another consideration. You may need different types of skill set within your organization now to make sure you're getting the most out of this new technology that we have access to. I'm going to finish off with some high level mythbusters. In a previous kind of conversation around AI that I had, this was appreciated, and we'll go into it. So. And these are kind of broad spectrum. And so like AI is powerful, but has significant limitations. And I think, like I've said, I'm trying to reinforce in this conversation, you need to understand what those barriers are if you want a very tangible result in a very specific amount of time. If you're just experimenting and have all the time to wait, by all means, open up the aperture and then the world's your oyster. The other thing that's very crucial to understand is because especially large language models can be very, very authoritative and convincing in the way it responds to questions, it is important to keep in mind that it isn't infallible and it isn't real intelligence. It is just making an association that's been successful in the past and giving you that association in a very effective format. So I'll give you an example. One of our electrical engineers did this as an experiment, asked the ChatGPT how to measure current across a resistor, and ChatGPT threw up a drawing and a whole page of instructions on what to do. And if anybody read it on top, it would look like an electrical engineer wrote it. And if you follow those instructions, your ammeter would have blown up because connecting in that fashion would have shorted the ammeter. So that's a good example. I mean, that was early on, and it probably doesn't happen as much with that specific question. It may not happen again, but that's good to keep in mind when you're using these open source big large language models like that, unless you're very specific in its questions and very specific in its use, there is some amount of error that you need to be careful about. And when you're looking at a problem to solve, whether it's a process issue, administrative issue, or a continuous improvement task, I think we're at a place in time that it would be necessary to think, would there be an AI solution for this? I know that seems far out for many organizations, including myself. We're only 140 employees. We're a relatively small company. To think about solving everything with AI feels rather otherworldly. But the capabilities and the costs involved are at a place where that's something that needs to be a part of it. Obviously, you need to keep in mind what the pitfalls are. And then this comes up, a lot of people worry about tasks and people being replaced, and it certainly is a factor in how, as AI progresses, there will be a lot of administrative tasks that are eliminated. An uncle of mine who worked for 35 years and just retired, he worked for a shipping company, managing logistics and customer-facing interactions, and he just retired in April. And his job is not being replaced by a human, it's being replaced by AI. And so good for him that he retired because he would have been redundant in 6 months, right? So it isn't inaccurate to say that there are some jobs that are going to be affected by this type of by AI in the future, especially in applications like that, which are large and global. But in those situations, what we don't immediately see is that there are other jobs being created to manage these services, to manage and implement and grow these services. So there is more of a transition of jobs to different types of applications. And so what's going to become more and more a factor is in how better we can adjust our skill sets to focus less on the day-to-day administrative stuff, focus on the people-facing tasks, because AI is not going to replace that, and then focus on the true value adds in our day-to-day work, where our experiential knowledge, our intelligence are crucial for that transaction. So, and obviously, if that's another another data point, and it's looking at it through history, when the industrial revolution happened and robotics and automation started becoming far more valuable, people had the same worry about jobs being lost, and jobs were lost. But if you look back on history, far more jobs were created through that transformation than were lost over time. So that's the only reference we have for something like this, which is a pretty big step change in technology. And it may not play exactly that way. I mean, I don't have an 8 ball, and none of us do. But that's the closest relational thing that happened in our history so far, recorded history, that we could point to and say, okay, there was redundancies, but there was a lot of those folks ended up finding different ways to add value to the economy and stay relevant. And that's another kind of myth, is that AI being data driven is more objective. It's not necessarily more objective. And again, this is broad because AI means many things to many different people. But when you're looking at it for data analysis specifically, it's a really, really powerful tool for data analysis, and it's getting better and better, more accessible every day. And I highly recommend exploring AI-based tools for that, because every job today has the opportunity, has some form of data analysis and data mining that happens. Some jobs are exclusively that. It can make a significant improvement in how effectively you can do those tasks and how reliably you can do them, how often you can do them. So sometimes certain things are only happening every month because it is so expensive in terms of time and resources to get there. But it isn't necessarily more objective. A spreadsheet also isn't more objective than a person. It has the numbers it has, but it doesn't mean they're objectively derived. AI has the same thing. It has, based on the relationships it's learned, those relationships between words or patterns it's seen may have been fed through data that's biased, and you're gonna see that in your results as well. We have several humorous cases of this with chat-based products out there, and like I said, that task-driven part of it is what AI is really good at. That's why AI agents and co-pilots are becoming far more commercially pushed, because even at the cutting edge, people who are building the next generation of AI products realize that the most effective use of the technology as it stands today is to automate things that people would do anyway without, those mindless sort of administrative tasks that traditionally humans had to do. I think the this one's a tricky one, and could be controversial in many ways. I mean, we at Sun sell an AI solution, right? And so it is important to keep in mind that there are specificity and is makes AI solutions more valuable. So I identifying those use cases are really, really important, and all the ways to make AI more effective over time, the training, the modeling, all of that requires you to have somebody who's effective at doing that, right? And so if you had a if you were if you if you took a child and let horses raise it, it wouldn't be very effective, right? You need people to do that piece, who know specifically what to do in that piece. And so there is that specificity and localization. That's something to keep in mind There are cases where the same problem exists in several different industries, and it's very, 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 very similar. That's many varies. And in that situation, something close to an out-of-the-box AI solution works really well, right? But that's not always the case. I think that's something to be caveated. So that leads us into buy versus build kind of decisions if you're at a corporate level or if you're making these decisions for yourself. Should we be buying these solutions? Should we be building them internally? Depending on the scale of your enterprise and organization and how much data you already have internally and how much value that you could generate internally with it, it may be better to build. But it's not as simple as say just build it. I think it's going to be a combination of both buy and build that gives us the best answers. This is something that people have talked about on and off out of Gen AGI, and I only put it in here because these are topics that come up in AI, and it may or may not be. It's not going to be relevant per se to manufacturing, but the truth is we're not there today, and that may be wrong by the end of the sentence, and things may have changed right now as well. We were on the call, but as of today morning, we don't have the resources, the infrastructure, the optimization of algorithms to make that a realizable immediate target. It's like going to Mars. Can we go to Mars? I think we can, or we could if we really, really, really try to. Can we go there today? Probably not. Not probably, definitely not. Or we would go there right now. Why wouldn't we? So that's the way to look at it. It's not just there are some significant feasibility limitations, both in terms of infrastructure, data, energy. Data centers are expensive. There's a reason why OpenAI is building data centers in the Middle East where energy is cheaper. Because data centers consume a lot of clean water for cooling, and they consume a lot of power for computational purposes. So this is an expensive thing to do. LLMs are expensive too. And so we're going to have to find better ways, and we are getting much better and more optimal every year in making these usable day to day. But that's still in progress. It's not there yet. And I don't think this is, looking at the outside, we had a team of 2 data scientists full time. We have that's been our team for our specific application. You do not need a full team of 10 to 20 people to build a very specific value proposition. What you do need is people who have a good understanding of scalability in your data structure. So that initial setup requires some specific knowledge, which is why that buy versus build decision is hard. You might need to get specialized knowledge to do that effectively, or bring it in from bring an external product in. But then, in terms of driving that value, training, and collaborating over time, and depending on how fast you need things to work, you don't need to hire 100 people to get started, or hire or invest that much money to get started. So it's now the right time, and I guess like last things I want to leave off here is now the right time, and then more importantly, as individuals, one of the things I try to focus on here is to give some practical implementation information to you guys, so you have a backdrop for approaching this in your career today or tomorrow, or actively participating in discussions inside your organizations when you're contemplating implementing AI-based solutions in your specific disciplines. But I want to leave you with some ideas that we're experimenting with in-house and seem to be effective even in larger organizations. The cost piece is critical. It is expensive, but it has never been cheaper. One of the things that has changed in the last year and a half, 2 years, is the amount of open source models, meaning there's a lot of code out there, open source models out there, that if you had the right resources, you could implement your own version internal to your enterprise without having to pay huge commercial licensing fees to use. That's a big deal, because that means you can start without having a significant cost debt or technical cost to get started for your own, if you want to build your own model. Cloud resources are getting more expensive, but they're still cheaper than than ever before, and it does limit the cost or the barrier for trying things. So in the case I said, if you found a specific problem like unplanned downtime, which is what we did, that you want to solve, you can take that and use the fact that the resources and some of these things are open source and experiment with very little cash out for 6 to 8 months and solving the problem and creating a viable solution. And then when it comes time to extend it and grow it, that's maybe where you have to implement it. But you can come to a good use case and validation of the value proposition without spending a lot of money, if provided you have some of the right talent involved and you're looking at it correctly. So small to mid-level operations, even large operations, should be looking at this right now, just because of the accessibility, cost, and the knowledge gaps being filled in around the industry itself. The number of people in paper and pulp that are more knowledgeable about AI today than it was a year ago is vastly different, both at customers and organizations and in the supplier base, because everybody is cognizant of how incredible this technology is, and everybody's working hard, especially on the suppliers, to find better ways to make that fit the problems that their customers have, right? There are exponential benefits from starting early, especially on the data infrastructure. Can't stress this enough. That is the foundation. You can't build a brand new factory without having the electricity infrastructure. You know, that's just a fact. You can't drive somewhere without roads. So the data platform is your foundation. It is expensive potentially to start, but it is very maintainable and it has tremendous value just outside of everything I just talked about today. You can have other immediate value in your operations today if you have this information ready and live, available and accessible. And then, from an individual contributor and putting your own hat in place wherever you are in your work organization, that value identification is probably the biggest contribution anybody can make, because you in your space know what's the most difficult thing to do and navigate. And just given the broad spectrum of options out there, there are possibilities of solving it very effectively if once you've identified where the gap is, right? I think internal entrepreneurship and pitching upwards is going to become a big part of making this change realizable, especially for large organizations. The main reason is the scale of change and the rate of change is so huge. You're not, no single individual or single part of the organization like IT is able to contemplate all the different ways this can be utilized effectively in a multifaceted organization. It's just too much information for one person to make all the decisions. And there isn't a prescriptive roadmap to follow. It isn't like somebody's already done everything exactly the way that would be effective for you, and you just replicate it. In fact, you stand to gain more from not replicating what other people did, because you can build your own path and create even more value than what other people have done, right? So you don't necessarily want to just copy and paste either. Obviously, data infrastructure and all that is something that is expensive and needs to come from the top and needs buy-in at the top. But I think we're experimenting, and some other larger organizations across the country are experimenting with creating almost like committees within different operational groups or job functions that have key contributors in these spaces and are given a task of experimenting in their own space, both experimenting and getting some training and knowledge within AI models and AI applications, and so that you're going to get some input from that job function. Oh, as a salesperson, this is the problem that gets solved, and these solutions and this type of solution is most effective. And that pitching that upwards is a much better way to implement across the board than somebody trying to figure out what's good for sales, what's good for operations, what's good for marketing, what's good for supply chain, what's good for engineering, because they're not all the same. And it shouldn't be all the same. And I believe that's it. Hopefully I don't know if we ran into, if you have any questions. I wasn't keeping time, so I may have run over. But
That's
Ye-
okay. That was great. And we recorded it all. So everyone who had to drop off early will get the recording and still hear those great words that you had. Io, you want to, Gokul, I was going to ask really quickly,
Sure.
would you be willing to share your information, or should
Yeah.
I ask people if they have questions, they could submit them and we'll send them over to you? Um,
Either
whatever's
way is
best for
fine.
you.
Either way
Okay.
is fine. I can share mine and more than happy to answer any questions or even be on a future call if it helps to organize something like that. Happy to do that,
Wonderful.
but whichever way helps.
Wonderful, because I think everybody just dropped off.
Yeah.
That's
It's
fine.
you and
That's
Io
fine.
and I. So we'll
Yeah.
we'll go ahead and cut the recording now. Let me do that so that it's not weird. Um, yeah, that was my biggest fear was that Summer